domestically mobilised resources and domestic investment from the private sector, as well as philanthropy and other forms of potentially patient capital. We looked at all of these different sources of finance. The estimates for closing the gap in access to electricity are that we need about $45 billion a year until 2030. We found in the report that about half of that is committed. Not saying it's flowing, but that it's committed. It's not dispersed, it's not reaching the people who don't have access yet, but we're halfway there. When it came to clean cooking, however, we unearthed a different story. The estimates for the amount of finance needed, the amount of investment needed to meet the clean cooking goals is about $4 billion a year. We were unable to track any financial flow that would come even close to being at the beginning of a trajectory for success for that number. In fact, in the high-impact countries, the 20 countries that have the largest access gap, we were only able to find an average of $32 million a year for residential use, looking at the period 2013 to 2014. We're not in the same ballpark, as they say in American sports, or in the same cricket ground here in India. The data is probably bad in that we haven't been able to detect everything that is flowing. There will be a project within a bigger project that is perhaps oriented towards clean cooking. But that in itself tells you a story. If it isn't tagged and it isn't tracked in a bilateral development organisation or in a multilateral financial organisation, I can tell you from first-hand experience, it's not a priority, it's not front of mind, and it's not relating to somebody's KPIs. So, is it really that low, or are we missing something? If we're missing something, what are we missing? But as I've listened to entrepreneurs around the world, and listened to social entrepreneurs and community groups, to big gas distributors, all the way down to innovative cook stove manufacturers, I have heard consistently that finance might not be there at the right price, at the right time, in the right format. So I would want to work with all of you to see, as we continue this data set into the future, whether we can improve our line of sight on this financial flow, and if we can understand even in more detail exactly what is going on. In this financial analysis, we went deep into a few countries. We looked closely at Bangladesh, Ethiopia, Kenya, and we came up with a first-time assessment of the cumulative cost of meeting targets for the cooking sector for both fuels and technologies. In those countries, they're estimated to be in the order of about 260 billion. Over 95% of that cost is not in the stoves, but in the fuels, as you know. So then I have another challenge for us as a community. Why is so much of the conversation on the cook stove, and perhaps too little of the conversation around what it will take to build vibrant markets for clean fuels for cooking, as the Minister already said this morning? So I'm fuel source neutral as an individual, as long as we're on the pathway to SDG 7 in Paris. But I think that we have a challenge to think of this in terms of everything we know about how to build and create markets, and not, if the development practitioners in the room will forgive me, projectise this problem too much. In recent weeks, I have heard all over the world, every region of the world, that energy access is something that can be solved by extending the grid with fossil fuel generated power. It hasn't happened for the last 200 years. I sincerely doubt that it's going to happen in the next 20 to 30. We need smart, clean grids with a very different energy mix in the future than the one we have now, and that transition is underway. But we do have to take this argument back into the marketplace. I'm afraid that our job is not done. We have to go back in there again and argue once again that it is impossible to end poverty or curb climate change while we suffer the devastating impacts of air quality in the cities and villages of the world. Our job is never done. The data is there, it needs to be highlighted, it needs to be made real in terms of people's lives, and it needs to be made a priority on the desk of ministers around the world. We know that when this becomes an issue of political priority at the centre of decision making, as has been the case in India, that action follows quite swiftly. But too few countries have yet taken this on as a political imperative. We have to once again go back out into the marketplace and make the case for the investment and the jobs and the community transformation that happens when clean fuels arrive. We know that people live longer. We know the incidence of disease comes down. We know that children do better. We know that women are able to do different things with the time that they win. And we have to make that argument again and again and again. We know that switching to clean fuels, typically LPG, or adopting advanced combustion cook stoves that burn biomass more cleanly or efficiently, or using other forms of gas, or using solar induction, we know that all of this will reduce health risks. And that dividend is something that we do not count in. And the social cost of the filthy alternative is still not counted by enough governments at a policy level. I don't believe that this is a time for incremental solutions. 3 billion people can be seen as a development problem, or it can be seen as an extraordinary opportunity of wealth creation and inclusive economic growth. It can be seen as a problem, or it can be seen as a big market waiting to open the door for people. So it isn't for me to tell the story of India, but India is an inspiration, not only in setting an aggressive target and an aggressive goal and an aggressive timeline, but then ratcheting up that aggression as things start to move. And we certainly hope that we can continue to partner with organisations here in India to understand what is working and what isn't working at the household level, when the woman actually uses the fuel